Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Happy May, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and also Mental Health May. It's sometimes called. I'm going to be doing a video based on a blog post which I did last May. It was published on May 22nd, 2024, and it's talking about my experience with PTSD-induced flashbacks and body memories. Now, technically, my PTSD is more along the lines of CPTSD, complex PTSD. I discussed that in much more detail in a video I did last year for Mental Health May, talking about my own, personal, mental health struggles I've, had over the decades. And I will obviously be putting a link to that video at the end of this. So anyway, let's start getting down with it. Traumatic experiences might end, but their impact never truly ends. There's no time limit on when exactly you heal from something, or when you slowly go through the grieving process, or just this and that. The brain is permanently impacted in a whole myriad of ways, as I had discussed in my previous video and blog post. For example, my writing became extremely tiny and squeezed together, a habit I just can't kick to this day. I made myself as invisible as possible at school and actively avoided a real social life, which I didn't realize until in November of 2001. That's a whole story in itself. Maybe I should do a blog post and a video about that, when I was planning to do that last May. Cyclical depression and non-pathological dissociation were triggered. I, of course, mentioned those in the previous video. If you guys really want to, watch it, of course, I'll be putting the link at the end. Another lasting impact is that of body memories. A body memory is a physiological response, energy, and feeling which is activated when something reminds us of the original trauma. Now, I know Wikipedia is notoriously inaccurate, but they shot it out big time for this. Their entry on body memories, it's some kind of woo-woo concept that has absolutely nothing to do with the very real absolutely proven psychological concept of body memories. But that's hardly the first time Wikipedia's been wrong about something. Every single time I walked or drove past my junior high in the years afterwards, I graduated in 94, until I left New York in 2017, I had extremely strong body memories. In my mind, I felt like I was back inside that building, and my stomach and throat began tightening with a shortness of breath and an overpowering feeling of physical fear. Even recalling it now revives that feeling all those years later. It's I graduated over 30 years ago now. When my lunatic ex-roommate was invading my personal space in 2013, when I was on the phone with my father, he could tell you the whole story about, she was just yabbering and yabbering. You could have put the phone down for an hour and come back and she'd still be yammering and yammering, not realizing you weren't listening to her. But anyway, her hostile attack dog attitude triggered me into a body memory, and I began gasping for breath. With that same overpowering sense of physical terror, I managed to gasp out that I felt like I were back at Hackett, my junior high school. My father suggested I hold one of my stuffed animals to calm down, my stuffed dog Keith, named after Keith Moon. My roommate was convinced, but this is a wild story. It's even wilder than just the brief summary I'm giving here. So anyway, she was convinced there was a meth lab in the communal cellar and serious drug activity in our apartment complex. Wow. It's just I can't believe it all these years later. Why would she even think that? She even got the manager of all the area's rental properties to do an investigation, and brought cops over one night at 1 a.m. on a weekend to check out the supposed evidence. Wow. She rightly looked like a total laughingstock and paranoid tinfoil loon when this investigation yielded absolutely no evidence of any drug activity whatsoever. And it was, on my side. I actually called Tim, the rental manager, to, do an update, check what was going on. I said, my roommate, I'm obviously not going to give her name here, came to you recently with a bizarre story about drug activity. And he told me we take the accusations and saying we think this, suspicions, whatever, of drugs very, very seriously. And they did a thorough investigation of all of the areas rental properties in several different cities, not just in Albany where we lived. And they found absolutely no evidence of drug activity whatsoever. And he says, oh, there's very serious consequences for people who make, accusations like that aren't true. And she had to like move out in shame. And I got a new roommate. Later started having like different kinds of issues with her. But that's, of course, a whole other story. But getting back to the crazy roommate story, and I promise this does, tie into the mental health May like topic. There wasn't a single moment of peace during the few months we lived together. Every day she found something new to complain about, either our apartment in particular or the complex in general. It was obvious she had deep trauma of her own influencing her behavior in much worse ways than mine ever has. I kind of suspect, and other people do too, she became like so like fervently orthodox as like to like kind of like atone for some so-called perceived sin in her past. But that's her like journey to walk, not mine. I can't really like, play armchair psychologist or speculate when like I'm like not treating her, and I'm not even a psychologist myself. But despite how much my old junior high triggered me, I relied on it as a North Star after I finally began driving at age 25. Believe it or not everyone immediately learns how to drive as soon as they turn 16. Albany is by and large a 15-minute city designed for people, surprise, surprise, those old-fashioned things, instead of cars, and more cars. Thus, driving instead of walking or taking a bus can be a bit tricky, especially downtown. Every time I missed my turn, thanks to so many one-way streets that were like kind of built before like car dependency or like cars even existed, or I didn't know where I was going, I drove towards Delaware Avenue and Hackett, which is at 45 Delaware and almost at the start of the avenue. I knew how to get there from any point downtown, and once I reached Hackett, I simply took the number 13 bus route to wherever I needed to go, uptown or midtown. It was a landmark I couldn't live without. In my day, kids in Albany took city buses instead of separate school buses. We used to call them like cheese buses, and the school is named after William Stormont Hackett, Albany's 70th mayor, and the namesake of the junior high I'm reading off the caption I included on the picture in this blog post the video is based on. Its official title is now Hackett Middle School, but the name engraved on the actual building is William Stormont Hackett Junior High School. And I know I'm a dinosaur over 40. I live under a rock. I just can't get used to how like almost no schools these days are still called junior highs. It's all middle schools, and elementary school routinely ends at like grade like 5 or even 4, and like junior high is like grades 5 through 8. That just make sense. This is why I don't support the contemporary idea that triggers should always be avoided at all costs. Facing our fears and traumas head on can help us to heal from them and remind us we're stronger than they are. The whole concept of exposure therapy, when it's done like responsibly and properly, that is. When we meticulously avoid them as potential dangers, guaranteed to give us a total breakdown no matter what, we let them have power over us. You can't properly heal if you never confront your issues. And in fact, of course, that leads to way more like conflicts and issues down the line. It's the same as like repressing all of your trauma. And, like a certain author I love to rant about, and I've done many videos about, you probably know her name, like she like advocates like, oh, when you dump it completely, you have no reason to think about bad memories or trauma or that whole gagging load of gagging garbage. You don't want to be like a pig wallowing in slop. It's just magic. Just don't think about it and you'll never have trauma again. Like, that's not how any of this works. Psychological triggers are very much real, as I know from my own experience. It really makes me angry to see so many people casually throwing the word around for every little thing in an attempt to protect everyone from potentially bad memories or phobias. I'm not made of glass, and I'm not a damn snowflake. Sure, there are subjects that are difficult for me to read about, but that doesn't mean I'll have a total mental collapse if I encounter, like, say, a story where a grandfather dies. And that did, like, get me really emotional in years past, but now that, like, the event that triggered that like emotional reaction in me is so far in the past, it's just not really like upsetting me at all or very much anymore. Also, because I haven't avoided directly confronting these topics, they no longer make me get so emotional. I was absolutely crippled by grief when my paternal grandpap passed away in August 2005. His 20th yahrzeit death anniversary is, coming up in a few months. It's hard to believe he's been gone that long. I couldn't stop sobbing during the 2 days of his wake and during his funeral. For years afterwards, I got really choked up when reading anything involving the death of a grandparent, especially a grandfather. But now, Writing this and doing the video isn't giving me flashbacks to seeing his dead body in the coffin, triggering waves of anguish and bringing tears to my eyes. I healed from the worst of my grief thanks to facing my triggers head on and pushing through them. And of course, I realize I know content warnings are a little bit different from trigger warnings, and I do understand there can be like a legitimate usage and purpose for content warnings. The number one example being not safe for work or under 18. Like, you don't want to get busted by the boss, or if you're like under 18, you shouldn't be like clicking to read like what kind of like over 18 material. Or for example, like warning someone like a link to like a news story or maybe like a historical website. This might have like it does have like very graphic images, let's say like the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide or something like that. So you don't want to be like, shocked and like, horrified and like taken by total surprise when you come across a picture of like decapitated heads or like weird medical experiments or whatever when you're reading it. And like very, very unusually for me, in my six snippet Sunday weekend writing warriors, that's the name of the blog, hop in 2023, when I was sharing from my very late contemporary historical fiction about 9/11. At the beginning of each of those blog posts, I gave like a content warning in bold saying it contained obviously extremely intense descriptions of the attack. So you know what's coming if that, God forbid, you lived through that event, or you just have other kinds of secondhand trauma from like watching it on live television like I did myself. You might not want to read it, or you can just like emotionally prepare yourself for a few moments or something like that. But I just really don't like this current trend of, I know it's kind of beyond parody at this point, but you're watching a video and it's like trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning, and the person talks for another minute and then trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. Oops, almost forgot the trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning, and oh, here's another round of trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning before I finally begin the video. And they're talking about things that most people wouldn't find like legitimately psychologically triggering. It's just, it might like upset them or something, and that really makes light of like legitimate psychological triggers in people who have PTSD and CPTSD and other kinds of trauma. And I've said in like other like blog posts, which I should probably turn into videos at some point, when people like throw around like actual like words and phrases that have like very specific real meanings, they kind of, people start to think they're like like overused jokes, and they like don't take them seriously, and it creates a boy crying wolf effect, and it makes it really, really difficult to have serious conversations about really important issues. So the rant over. The same goes for my trauma over my car accident, which happened in August 2003. For many years, as soon as I was finally able to walk again, it took 11 months before that could happen, I ran across the road when the light was red, like, as soon as it turned red. I didn't want another car to hit me, very understandable, like fear. I don't leisurely amble across now, but I no longer feel the need to race like I'm trying out for the Olympics. The rude co-counselor, she'll remain nameless, I had one year at the Orthodox day camp, who was young enough to be my daughter, was chutzpahdik enough to try to tell me I was wrong for running across the road so fast when we were taking the nursery campers out for some kind of field trip. It was probably like one of the little playgrounds nearby. Like, nursery campers don't go so far away on their field trips unless we're, of course, driving them. You're not in my mind, little girl. You're not the one who was almost killed in a car accident. This same girl was also horrified. I corrected her. Oh, the audacity. I know better than someone who's all of 17. And I corrected her on the geography and said, Yemen is in Asia, not Africa. She refused to believe I was right, and she said she would have to look it up. Well, guess what? Yemen is in Asia. It's on the Saudi Peninsula. It is nowhere on the African continent. Like, whoever told her that in her religious school, they either like need some like training, they're ignorant, they shouldn't be teaching, or like she like severely misinterpreted what they said. Mental health is so personal. It's really gross and presumptuous to try to dictate to other people how they're supposed to act and react, like, even years later. It just makes me so angry. People just throw around, oh, I'm triggered. Like, and they're laughing at people who have like legitimate psychological issues or like other things that are very real, and they just like throw these words around, and like people well, I'm not going to get too political, but people on the certain side of the aisle tend to think, oh, if you talk about like triggers, you must be some like woke little libbed out snowflake on TikTok, instead of like this is a legitimate psychological issue you have, or these are other like very real concepts, but because people just like throw them around at the drop of a hat and don't even like use them correctly, it just really makes me angry that they've just been like co-opted, I guess, by like people who are just not even like taking them seriously on both sides. But that's a whole rant for another topic. So thank you very much for watching. I have several other videos planned for mental health may related to books and writing, including I'm not sure if I'll do like several videos on this book, because it's so long, or if I'll do just like one general, maybe a little bit longer than usual video talking about it. I'm so horrified at what's happening to this woman already. Her husband was an abusive, she wasn't even mentally ill. He just sent her away, and her father had earlier institutionalized her. Both of them were just, what's like, oh, she's doing too much thinking. She's expressing different opinions than hubby and daddy, and she's learning too much, and she's not like dutifully accepting her godly ordained, as they believe, then like divine role as a subordinate inferior woman. And it's so creepy. Her husband is 15 years older than she was. Like, they married when she was 22 and he was 37, and he knew her since she was 10 years old. And like, she only married him because like he works with her father, and like, oh, she has to please her father. That's usually almost always the reason, like, for huge age gap couples in that era, contrary to some certain people trying to rewrite history and claim, oh, it was totally normal until like the 60s or 70s for teenage girls and women in their early 20s to marry men who were like 10 plus years older. No, it wasn't. But anyway, and I also have a video about how to write about like mental health and such like that in historical fiction. And as I promised, like, fairly recently, I have several, like, two videos, I believe, coming up talking about how we know Beatrice Sparks was not a real psychologist based on all the many clues she left throughout her book. So thanks very much again for watching. Like, please let me know down in the comments, do you have like your own experiences with like CPTSD or PTSD related to like body memories and like legitimate psychological triggers and like flashbacks and stuff like that? Or what are your own, like, of course, if only if you feel comfortable sharing your like mental health struggles which you have had over the year. Are you doing any like videos or reading or such for mental health may? So just any comments you guys can think of, and see you soon. Bye.